What's up, everybody? It's DisThunder, and we are back to talk some more Mezco toys. Today it's going to be the 112 Collective G.I. Joe Snake Eyes figure. Now, it's probably not super necessary to go over Snake Eyes and his history, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway because I love talking about Snake Eyes. His first appearance would have been G.I. Joe #1 all the way back in June of 1982, which was actually a month before I was even born. The most visually distinct member of the original 13. Snake Eyes' primary MOS is the good old 11 Bravo. He was an infantryman first and foremost, and that's important to remember. People get that lost when we get into Ninja Force and all that other shit. His secondary MOS was listed as, I think it's a hand-to-hand combat instructor. Today we call that like a combatives trainer. I don't know what MOS that is, but suffice to say, that also makes sense for him. He carried the rank of Sergeant E5, presumably through Vietnam and then into his G.I. Joe career. But I think by the end of the Devil's Due run, I think he was a Master Sergeant. He was presumably trained at Mac V SOG back in the Vietnam days. Recondo School would be my first guess. And he joined the Long Range Reconnaissance Patrol teams. That's where he met Stalker and Tommy Arashikage, better known as Storm Shadow. This is where he obviously picked up his Special Forces lineage and also had some connections to Delta Force before joining the Joes. One of the things that the cartoon got right, though, is he is the silent assassin. Following an injury in Vietnam, he required extensive facial reconstructive surgery, but his vocal cords could not be salvaged, unfortunately for him. And the extent of those injuries obviously depends on the canon and the stuff you're looking at, because for the most part, I think in the original comic, other than when you actually see him, it's sort of implied it's not as major as it's kind of a Doctor Doom thing. But then when it was finally revealed, it was a little bit more severe than I think we were expecting. Anyway, Snake Eyes is the resident commando and covert mission specialist for G.I. Joe, and has also been the head of his own little subsets of Joes like the Ninja Force and the Shadow Ninjas. The Mezco figure wears his Arashikage lineage proudly on his right sleeve. I kind of wish there was a flag patch on there somewhere, but that's, it wasn't on the original figure either, so that's okay. It's fun to talk about Snake Eyes figures, and it's also kind of nice to be maybe a little more critical than usual, because the beauty of Snake Eyes is he's like Pringles, man. We're never going to have just one. Interestingly, I think Mezco chose to kind of play off the V2, mostly, obviously, with the visor and everything. But, he's actually kind of a mix of V2, a little bit of V3, and there's even some G.I. Joe, 2007 movie mixed in there for good measure. Purely personal preference, my favorite Snake Eyes is still the V1 Commando style with the goggles and the turtleneck. But there is something undeniably pop culture icon about a V2 Snake Eyes with the visor. Because that also means you get the swords, you get timber, and as you might expect, that's all stuff that's included in this box with this figure. It has to be said, full disclosure though, that really, for the most part, I think Hasbro's done an excellent job in the G.I. Joe classified line, so there's already kind of a good bar set for a good Snake Eyes figure. Obviously, I think this Mezco one exceeds that bar, but I know I'm a little bit biased and I can accept that. Now, biased as I may be, there are a few things on this figure that I would consider kind of nitpicky. One in particular that is kind of an outright irritation, but there's a couple of little things that just bother me a little bit about it, and I want to get those out of the way first. And the first one I want to talk about is the sheath holder for his back. Sorry, I had a fur on there. You see that little teeny plastic guy that clips on? It'll hold either one of the sword sheaths. It attaches to the back of his bandolier about midway up his back, but it does not stay put worth a damn. This isn't a huge deal, and actually, for what it's worth, I think it's positioned a bit low on his back, so when it pops off, which I assume everybody's inevitably will, you can then re-glue it like a little bit higher up his shoulder like that. Or put it right back if you liked it where it was. Now, this is the part that genuinely pisses me off, and it seems to be on both my figures. You go to move his neck, and that's what's going to happen to you. I think this is a result of the suit kind of tenting up around that ball joint and just not letting that neck get a good seat on that collar. And it's a shame because actually the range of motion is really good. But as you can see, as you move it up to the extent, you get some gaps. On the lower end of the spectrum, I have to admit I'm not a huge fan of these boots. The ankle pivot range on it is great. I mean, he's got excellent side to side, and the back range is pretty good. The front hits that kick plate a little bit lower than I would have liked. And I don't know, something about this design leaves him a little bit wobbly for my taste. Me being a commando guy, that might be why I don't like the kick plate, but it feels like it kind of affects the function a little bit too. Might as well talk articulation while we're doing that. On that double-jointed, ball-jointed neck, you can see there is the top ball joint, and it's nice range, and, you know, of course, it comes right back out of the collar again. They do have a good range, especially the upper one. The lower one, as soon as you start trying to bury his chin in his chest or try to arc his neck upward, that's where you're going to have trouble with it popping out or leaving a gap at the very least. But back on the positive side, I think this is a return to butterfly joint. It's not a huge range, but I feel there's a little bit of give there. And good range outward. The costume helps a lot with that. Nice double-jointed elbow. Really good ball-jointed wrists. The suit's designed to have a little bit of bagginess. God damn it. We don't need that. We'll just go without it. But the bagginess allows you to get a really good range forward and back on the torso joint. Like, really well. I think it's designed, like, it's definitely designed to allow him to move, and that was very well thought out. This benefits his hip joints as well, so you've got a pretty good range out and forward. The pants are baggy enough to not really get you too hung up in a particular spot. Good double-jointed knee. Watch that thigh drop. It'll want to slide down. I wonder if it might be worth stitching it somewhere just to keep it in place. The holster thigh drop actually is pegged into the belt and stays really well on its own. While we're complaining, I wish that there was a spot on either one of these thigh drops for his suppressor when it's not on either of the guns, or maybe a spot for like his kunai or his throwing daggers, but again, that's a really minor, petty nitpick. But if I say these things out loud, you guys can't call me an apologist, right? One feature they did think out is on the back of his belt, they put a swivel on the sheath for his fighting knife, so you can switch it to left or right hand, whatever you prefer. Let's go ahead and get into size comparisons, and there's where you'll find Snake Eyes is maybe a little bit taller than people were expecting. Here he is with Supreme Knight and with a Black Skull's Death Brigade. And, I mean, for a grunt, I mean, he was an infantryman. He's, you know, probably 6 foot and a couple hundred pounds, so he looks appropriate if that's the Snake Eyes you're going for. Although, obviously, he's a little bulkier than the Death Brigade, but he's nowhere near as thick as Supreme Knight. Here he is with my custom Commando Snake Eyes, which is basically diabolic with some Netflix Punisher. Actually, I don't remember how much, other than the pants, is Netflix Punisher. And obviously, he's quite a bit taller than that figure. And I should stress this, I don't mind that. I know there's kind of this idea that Snake Eyes should be, you know, shorter and smaller and more lithe, but again, he was an infantryman. It makes sense for him to be, well, about the same size as Destro here. Destro's a bit thicker. Again, he's obviously got a wider chest and a little wider build, but the fact that they are comparable in height is not really a problem for me at all. By the way, I don't remember why this other Destro has red hands on him. I don't remember what I was doing with his hands, so just pretend that they're his Black Factory hands, because I'm sure they're around here somewhere. Here he is with his squad mate Roadblock, and again, size and scale-wise, I think this looks great. I still can't stress enough how awesome Roadblock is as a figure, and having Snake Eyes to pair up with him just makes Roadblock that much more fun, if I'm being honest. One thing I'm kind of torn on with Roadblock and with Snake Eyes and with G.I. Joes in general is the knee pad thing. I took them off Roadblock, and I kind of felt like I wanted to put some on Snake Eyes, but honestly, knee pads were not really in vogue in the 80s. I mean, we don't really see knee pads on loadouts for Special Forces guys until, like, Black Hawk Down. And there's also something about putting knee pads on Snake Eyes where I feel like you kind of take him from being a commando or a very light loadout ninja to kind of going into, like, tactical SWAT cop territory. Now we get to talk Snake Eyes accessories, and we'll start with the biggest one, which is timber. Unlike some of the classified figures we've received, Mezco included timber in the box right there with Snake Eyes. And the more I play with this thing, the more impressed I am with it. From the outset, he's kind of big, which he's a wolf, so that makes sense. The paint is stellar on him, and he's actually got really good articulation. Ball joint neck pops off there. There's actually a couple extra heads that I'll show you as we go through more of these. You've got in and out range on his hips and his shoulders, hind leg articulation, and a little bit of articulation at the paws. On the front legs, that piece of articulation just above his paw is maybe a little bit awkward, but it's there. It's extra articulation, so it's certainly not a bad thing. And as you saw, there's like a mid-torso joint, yeah, right there, and then the tail's got a little bit of articulation as well. The paint on this is, I think, what got me the most. It's very striking. It's got a really good weathering detail to it. Here he is with the classified Snake Eye, or excuse me, the classified Timber figure from the box set. And I gotta say, there's really not a wrong answer in these two. I think the classified one has a little bit more personality than the Mezco one does. Feels more distinctively Timber. But again, I like the size of the Mezco and I like the paint. Here he is with that classified Timber if you want to see how that stacks up. And like I said, there's really not a wrong answer here. It really just comes down to your preference because they're both pretty damn good. I'm going to give the edge to the Mezco just on the size and the paint, but like I said, there's something a little bit more character driven about the classified Timber, which I think works as well. In fact, I keep kind of going back and forth on it myself. Next, we'll talk weapons, and of course, then we'll start with the guns, which comprise of a full-size IMI Uzi 9mm and what I believe to be an H&K VP9. Both of these weapons can take the included suppressor. I talked a bit about the Uzi on one of my Instagram posts. It's one of the most iconic personal firearms on the planet. Even the most novice gun folk can recognize an Uzi by silhouette. That VP9, on the other hand, I'll be honest with you, I'm not 100% that that's the right identification for it, but the sites lead me that way, especially because they do make a VP9 that is designed for a suppressor, so that's my best guess. Anyway, both guns come with an extra magazine, and I believe, it looks like the pistol's slide will rack, but I'm not 100% on that either, to be honest, because I don't want to break it just trying to rack the damn thing. Next up, man, we've got a hell of a edge weapon and throwing weapon loadout here. You've got 6 of the iconic M26 grenade. There's actually another 3 that are permanently attached to the bandolier, but honestly, that's a very good thing because those guys were not going to stay on there, no way, no how. You have a 3-section nunchaku. You've got 3 Roppo Shuriken, 3 Manji Shuriken. You've got 6 throwing knives. You've got 2 butterfly swords that look just a little familiar. A Ninjato sword with its own sheath, and a Falchion sword with its own sheath. There's also the Tonto knife, which I showed earlier, that's on the sheath that plugs into his back. I don't think I completely nailed the pronunciation here, but I've had a sinus infection for 2 weeks, so you're lucky I tried it all. I'll just show you a smattering of his hand options because there are many as usual, and you know how I am when it comes to doing hands and reviews. However, these throwing effects, the shuriken hand and the grenade hand, are particularly awesome and probably the best version of this style of effect I've seen so far. It's also worth noting he has some cool palm strike hands, and there's also a couple of semi-grip hands that have spaces in between the first 2 fingers to hold the shuriken or the throwing knives. And as always, it's those little attention to detail that set this apart from what everybody else does. Not unlike how nicely painted and sculpted these bare teeth timber head variants are. The one on the right you could kind of use as a default, I think, if you wanted to, but that open mouth one is definitely a fight scene timber head sculpt, and maybe serves as a good reminder of why the rest of us don't really need to have wolves as pets. So it may feel like I might be being a little bit hard on old Snake Eyes here in a few places. But like I said from the outset, it's little stuff. That ball joint not wanting to stay on his neck is obnoxious, but not the end of the world. I mean, you could glue it if you absolutely had to. I may try something a little different when I get some free time. And, the sword sheath thing is really not a big deal. You just glue it where you'd prefer it to be. And, the fact I don't like the boots and the kick plates is, again, more of a personal preference because I'm sure there's people who don't really care for the suit, but on the other hand, I do like the suit. I like the fact that he's kind of an amalgam of several different Snake Eyes looks. So my criticisms come from a place of love because genuinely, this is one of those figures of one of those characters. It's like, I don't know that you're ever going to get that 10 out of 10 Snake Eyes for everybody, but this thing is so much damn fun to play with that it kind of doesn't matter. If he's an 8.5 or a 9, he's still a blast. And so you should probably still get one. Actually, you should definitely still get one. If you have any interest in doing G.I. Joes or Snake Eyes, there's really no reason not to. But if I haven't convinced you 100% because of that, well, maybe you just need to sit tight and see if we do a commando version or a V3 version or, I don't know, a Renegades or a Resolute inspired one. I mean, all those would be incredibly badass too. So I don't know that you would necessarily win for losing, but I'd hate to see somebody miss out on this figure just because he's not their go-to Snake Eyes, or, you know, me and other people bring up some of these little nitpicks, kind of shy him away, because, again, we're talking about like a solid, you know, 8.5, 9 out of 10 kind of figure here. And yeah, he's just that much damn fun. And as soon as you get him in hand, as soon as you kind of get used to working with him, and you get an idea of how the layout works, and, you know, how to use the weapons and throwing effects and how to put him best into play, you're going to love the hell out of him. So with that in mind, I would say yes, absolutely recommend. I would also like to say thank you very much to Mezco Toys for keeping me busy as hell the last couple months. This is a lot of fun, and hopefully I'll have a few more reviews coming in quick succession shortly after this one. But thanks for helping me get a copy to review. And, of course, thanks to you guys for listening to me talk about one of my favorite characters in non-Batman lore history. And we will see you again soon. Thank you.